So everybody tends to have this question, the question of when did life begin? How long ago was that? Can we trust the scientific world, or is there something in the Bible that we can look to that explains things? And so I think that's the most important thing is to get into the Word of God and see what it says. And so as we look here, what does the Bible say? Does it outline some genealogy? Is there some archaeological finds that we can prove the age of the existence of man? And so what we can do, though, is we can look in the scriptures. And so this begins in Genesis. You see in Genesis 1 where it says God created in 7 days. And so if you read through that, you can see the process of 7 days of creation. And then it goes on and it gives us actual genealogy. And what's so cool is some people are like, okay, well, maybe that's vague. Maybe we can kind of see where we get to. But it literally outlines the genealogy from Adam and Eve all the way to Jesus. And so what we see actually in Genesis 5 is the beginning of that genealogy happening. And so it says here, when Adam was 130 years old, he became the father of a son who was just like him in his very image. He named his son Seth. And if you continue reading 5, it goes through this person was this old when they had this kid. And you can literally take the genealogy down from Adam all the way to the end of that chapter. It says, after Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And so there in one chapter, you go from Adam all the way to Noah, about 2,500 years of history in one chapter. And so to go further, though, to how do we get then from Noah all the way down to Jesus? You continue over into chapter 10 and 11 of Genesis, and it says, this is the account of the families of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their the three sons of Noah. And children were born to them after the great flood. And if you continue reading 10 and 11, you're going to go from Ham, Shem, and Japheth, or Noah, all the way to Abraham. And it brings us right up to where Abraham, God begins to stir in the heart of Abraham and create the nation of Israel. And so quickly you get all the way from Adam and Eve all the way to Abraham in a short couple of chapters of the Bible. Then we can move all the way over to Matthew. And in Matthew, he does a really awesome thing for us in the fact that he outlines the genealogy that he has studied and researched throughout the Old Testament and summarized in one chapter the genealogy from Abraham all the way to Jesus. And so it starts off, Abraham was the father of Isaac, and he goes on and on and on. And then it ends in, the genealogy ends in verse 16 where it says, Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary gave birth to Jesus, who was called the Messiah. And so quickly you go from Adam and Eve all the way to Jesus in about 5 chapters, Genesis 1, Genesis 5, Genesis 10 and 11, and Matthew 1. You get a quick genealogy and even timeline. And if you don't have the timeline found in Matthew 1, you just go back to the Old Testament and look at how long and when people had those children. So when did Abraham have his child? And you can quickly build out a timeline that gets us from Adam and Eve, the beginning of creation, the beginning of time, all the way through to Jesus. And then if you look at secular history, Roman history and all that, you can build an easy timeline from Jesus to today, 2018. And so it's easy to see how old and what the age of the earth is and when Adam and Eve were created. But then there's this conflict. Science world, radiometric dating, that they've taken and say they've proven that the universe right now, in their best estimation, is 4.5 billion years old. How do they come to that? Well, there's this radiometric dating technique. They take something that is organic matter, such as a peach or a banana or something like that, that they know the beginning age of it. And they take radiometric dating, the rate of decay that is, and over time, they determine how old that piece of fruit or that organic matter is. Then they take that organic matter mentality that they've proven, okay, I can tell this peach is 3 weeks old because I know when it came off or when it was born. And radiometric dating proves that that is true. They then take that and they apply it to a thing like a rock or dust on Mars, which is where they get their 4.5 billion years old theory. And they apply it to something that In Genesis 1, we see God created in a moment. He said, let there be light. And he said he created in one day the stars and the moon and the sky and everything that was in existence. He did it in 1 week. And so he created things that were in their maturity all in one moment. So in order for radiometric dating to work on things that God created in one moment, you have to reject that God created. That God in a moment created something in its maturity. And so while it might look to be 4.5 billion years old, God said, let it be, and it was in its maturity. Just like Adam and Eve, just like the animals, he created them in mature form. And so when we ask that question of how old is the earth, when did Adam and Eve exist and live, and do we have proof that they exist and live? We do in the Word of God. And so you might have questions, you might be questioning, like that might have stirred more thoughts in your head. If you're at that point in your life and you have more questions, let us know. We'd love to answer them. We'd love to go deeper into this question, because while I've given you a few minutes of an answer, it might not solve everything for you. And so my other thing to leave you on is get in the Word of God. I gave you those genealogies. Get in and study it yourself. Get into the Matthew genealogy and go back into the Old Testament and find out if that's exactly how it happened. Because we have to either understand, are we going to trust 6,000 years of history handed down by God and preserved by Him and Himself? Or are we going to trust a scientific method that was developed in 1905 and changing every day, trying to understand what God created in a moment?